You should never play the whistle game at night. Say that aloud if you need to. Tell yourself, tell a friend, tape it to the inside of a trunk. I'm telling you because I know what happens when you break that rule. I'm telling you because I survived when the others didn't, and surviving is not the same as winning. We drove back to Camp Grinlow the way we used to, headlights cutting through the black. Radio turned down to nothing so the night could fill the car. The sign at the entrance was half buried in vines, the paint blistered. The camp's mascot, a grinning trout, barely visible where decades of rain had eaten at the wood. Annie said it looked smaller than she remembered. Max said everything looked smaller once you were old enough to notice your knees. I laughed because I wanted to, because laughter is an old reflex we carried like a talisman. It smelled the same as it always had, wood smoke and wet earth, that peculiar mix of pine sap and detergent from the old cabins. The road to the main field crunched the same under the tires, gravel like the pages of a well-read book. The cabins sagged a little farther toward their neighbors, porch steps warping into strange angles. We parked and sat in the dark for a long minute, letting the quiet settle over us. There was a freedom in that quiet, the kind that belongs to children and thieves. Max was loud enough for all of us. He found the old rope swing by the lake and threw himself at it like a kid, laughing as he scraped his palms. He still had the same habit of telling the worst jokes at the worst time, carving comfort out of nonsense. Annie, always the watchful one, ran her fingers over the carved initials on the picnic table, squinting at the faded letters. She'd been the sort of person who noticed the way light pooled in a window, the particular hum of a summer cicada. She replaced the same small jar of peppermint lip balm in her pocket 3 times that night, and told me, quietly, not to get cut up on the broken boards. We made a fire the way we used to. Flint, kindling, a stubborn pile of dry twigs we coaxed into flame. The fire spat and crowned in the darkness, throwing our faces into something like youth for a few hours. We roasted marshmallows until they lost their shape, sang a few lines from songs we hadn't remembered entirely, and told each other stories that were more habit than invention, the same rituals that had once knit us together into a small, shameless tribe. Somewhere in that warmth the idea came up, the stupid dare that tastes like nostalgia and regret. Not a plan so much as an ache. Remember the game? It was Max who said it, voice light like a match strike. Annie's hand paused over the marshmallow stick. For a second the past folded over the present and everything brightened and terrible at once. I will not tell you how the game goes. I will not give you the particulars that would make it possible to imitate us in an empty field. There are rules, yes, and rules are part of how a child's world explains itself. Do this, don't do that, and you will have order. We had learned them, forgotten them, and pulled them back out like a dare. That night, alcoholic and more dangerous for it, we tried to be children again. That choice is the point of warning. Ordinary nostalgia is safe. This was not. If you like campfire stories, if the crack of a flame and the taste of burned sugar makes your spine tingle and your curiosity itch, follow me for more. But if your curiosity ever points you back to a place where rules are carved into wood and remembered in the dark, let this be the one story you hear before you answer the dare. The first whistle came from the trees. It was thin at first, like the breath of an animal, a part of the night that could have been wind. We paused. The sound tugged at a memory that sat in the seam between adolescence and now. It was a sound that belonged to the camp the way the lake belonged to the summer, not entirely foreign, a little wild and private, and meant only to be heard when the moon was right. We smiled in a way that didn't reach our eyes. The whistle cut again, closer this time, and the laugh in my throat died. At first we treated it like a dare within a dare. Annie shrugged and said it was probably some kid with a harmonica, or the wind through a broken feed pipe. Max called out a challenge, an old instinct to outdare the night. The sound answered him, and it felt like crossing a line we could not see. Then Annie fell. 1 second she was there, fingers tapered around the marshmallow stick, the ember glow flickering over her cheekbones. The next she was gone in a way that left no room for argument. She gasped once, not a word, not a plea. The sound was animal and sudden, and her body folded like a bad puppet, knees buckling with a precision that was too fast and too clean. Her head snapped, and her hands clutched at her own shirt like someone trying to remember where they had placed their name. There was a noise I can't put a label to. Not a scream, but a rending of a shape. And then silence. A terrible, absolute silence that the night swallowed whole. For a moment we thought it was a seizure. For a moment we said the things people say when the world tilts. Hold on, breathe, stay with me. I grabbed her shoulders, fingers fumbling for a pulse as if that could anchor her back to us. Her skin was too cold against the heat of my hands. Her eyes were open in a way that did not match any living thing I had ever known. Glassy and wide and emptying, as if some animal had been scooped away from behind them. Annie's mouth moved once in a ragged, helpless lip motion, like someone trying to speak a word that wouldn't form. Max's hands were a blur. He tried to pick her up, half dragging, half lifting, like he could outrun the fact of it. His voice was higher, thinner. He said something about an ambulance, about calling someone, about needing daylight. He was breathing in the way a person with a panic attack does, sharp and rapid, and the sound of his breath became a metronome that calibrated my fear. The whistle didn't stop. If anything, it sounded nearer, as if whatever made it had shifted from the dark wood to the space just beyond our firelight. It threaded through the leaves with an implacable ease, keen and merciless. When it sounded, Annie's body twitched an extra time, a small, grotesque echo. Max looked at the trees with a wild, hungry hope you can only see on someone who wants to believe a miracle more than they fear its consequences. He said, "That's not," and the rest of his sentence frayed into nothing. People behave in slices in a crisis. Memory compresses, a hand, a shard of light, a name. I remember the white of Max's knuckles where he gripped Annie's arm, how his jaw worked like an animal. I remember thinking, with a kind of dizzy ridiculousness, that if we could get Annie to the road, if the ambulance could come, maybe, the night would hand her back. Then Max stood up. He did not wait for us to think. He ran. He broke the ring of our firelight the way a stone can break glass. His steps were heavy at first, frantic, then a desperate, tearing sprint. He called back something that could not be heard, or perhaps was drowned out by the whistle. I could not tell. The shadow swallowed him. We didn't give chase. Who runs toward the forest where the thing that killed Annie whistles like a toy? We stayed, stunned, grounded by horror like simple creatures. Then he was pulled. At first there was a sound like two bodies wrestling in the leaves, the kind of noise a heavy person makes when they trip. Then Max's voice, up close and raw, and then a scraping. I saw a hand flash out of the underbrush, fingers splayed, and then Max's leg jerked at an impossible angle. He fell and did not move the way a man who had tripped does. The trees took him with a vicious, silent economy, like a tide taking driftwood. He made one long, strange sound that might have been his name, and it broke. We could do nothing. We had learned rules a long time ago about stepping off the path, about ropes and counselors and not going out alone. None of it prepared us for the way the world could shut like a trap. The whistle cut through the trees, and the night returned to itself, as if nothing had happened at all. If you're listening for a reason to test whether this is true, whether grief or drink turned us into fools, whether pranksters hid in the dark with wires, I have none for you. I have only that night, and the knowledge of how quickly the human mind tries to fill voids. We believed in the rules only after the first break. That is the sorrow. Logic arrives after loss, always a step slow. After Max was gone, the whistle seemed to move us. I remember the sensation of my body answering a rhythm that was not mine. A small, urgent step here, a pause there. A want-us, a memory of being 14 and playing a game where the rules made sense for the world of teenagers. The whistle punctuated. Move, freeze, step. I do not know what compelled my limbs more, fear or the need to be where the living are. If I wanted to survive, I had to play. I will not tell you the specifics of the motions. I will tell you that every sound of that whistle tightened the skin on my face like a vice. My ankle turned under me on a root, a blade of pain that wanted to be the end. But the whistle continued, unhurried, as if keeping time for some indifferent metronome. My breath came in sharp little half-sobs. Somewhere a twig snapped, and I flinched as if the noise were an accusation. Each step toward the sound rewired my memory. I saw Annie's face in fragments, the scar on her chin from a canoe jump, the freckle near her left eye she tried to hide with bangs, the way she would sit with her knees pulled up when the world seemed too loud. Each recall was a stab. Memory is cruel that way, offering the most tender things when you need them least. Pain crept in as a distraction, then as a companion. My ankles swelled with protest. My palms bled from grabbing at roots. I felt the skin of my knees drag along bark as if the earth itself wanted an accounting. But worst was the sensation of being led, and the horror of understanding that what led me was not benevolent. I wanted to stop. I wanted to throw myself to the grass and never move again, to curl around the image of their faces and let the thing that whistled have its silence and go. But the whistle bled into the marrow of the camp and my body obeyed it, as if obedience were the price of another hour of breath. There is an odd cruelty to forced compliance. It transforms the player into instrument, and the rules into a kind of corporate judge. You comply because the alternative is simple and terrible. You comply because the mind, in its surreal clarity, decides that motion is safety even when it feels like surrender. I moved because every sound that came from the trees made the ground under my feet more bearable. Staying still made the world sharpen into a single, unbearable note. When the thing was near, the air changed. It didn't smell like rot or flame. It smelled like old cloth, like a trunk closed for too many summers. There was a low vibration in the leaves, as if someone had pressed their ear to the wood and hummed. My hands trembled and reached out because some ancient part of me wanted to touch what made this noise, to know that it was flesh and not just terror. That touch, I thought, might be the end. It was, in a way I cannot explain. I reached out to touch what I thought would be a body. My fingers brushed bark, and then something that wasn't bark, something soft and wrong, like the inside of a pocket someone had turned wrong side out. I expected a monstrous shape, a creature with too many limbs, an eye that blinked with unnatural intelligence. Instead, at the edge of my fingers was a tree. The contact was anticlimactic, and yet it destroyed me. Nothing leapt from the wood. There was no appendage to recoil from, no wet mass, only the ordinary patient trunk of a camp tree, furrowed and warm from a day of sun. The whistle changed its pitch, as if amused, testing. Around the base of the tree lay two forms, Annie and Max, whatever remained of the people they had been. They were arranged in a way that was cruelly domestic, as if laid down or collapsed mid-task. But their limbs were bent in unfamiliar ways, and their faces wore the slackness of something that had been emptied. I was later told that bodies do not quite belong where we leave them. I will not place them precisely, out of a small mercy both for you and for what remains of them in my memory. Suffice it to say that the sight made something in me crack. I knelt and cupped Annie's face, and the skin under my palms was as cold as the underside of a stone. Max's mouth was slack. If his lips could have formed words, they never did. There was a smear on Max's sleeve that could have been blood. There was a smell of iron in the air, but I will not give it life by naming it. I touched the tree because my hands needed to know the world was solid. My touch did nothing. The whistle trilled, one small, contemptuous note, and the sound folded into the leaves. The thing that had summoned us, whether it was a pattern of sound, a will, an old camp superstition made manifest, had no body that could be grasped. It was the absence around the bodies, the space that could shape grief into something else. I hate that night because it taught me a lesson I did not want. Some games do not have rules written in human language. They have their own economy of cost and debt. We had treated the whistle game like a memory, something light and ephemeral. We had been wrong to assume that nostalgia is harmless. The camp held a ledger, and we had spent without reading the margins. After that, there were practicalities that the telling must sweep over because the memory is too heavy for inventory. I do not recall exactly how I left the field. I remember pressing my face to a steering wheel and finding that I couldn't breathe properly. That sobbing seized my throat in waves. I remember driving with the headlights on for miles, unable to stop for the nearest lit town. I remember parking on the shoulder and shaking until dawn pushed in through the windows and the world went mundane again. Grocery stores opening, a dog walker with a cup of coffee, someone jogging with earbuds. There was a dissonance I could not reconcile. The night had taken people from me, and the world continued to deliver its ordinary minutes as if nothing had happened. There were questions that followed, as questions always do after trauma. Who else knew a thing like that could happen? Had counselors been warned? Were there signs we missed? A counselor's hushed warning? A carved symbol behind the arts and crafts shack? I found traces of rumor in the town. Older kids who'd left, a counselor who'd quit without a word. But rumor is naughty and unreliable. It will tell you that the camp had closed and reopened on a schedule of misfortune. It will claim that something ancient keeps watch. It will give you ghost stories that have names and dates. I will not give you those names as certainties. I only know what I lived through. Guilt arrived as a weather pattern of its own. At first it was a furnace heat, the kind that forces apologies and hysterical rearrangements. I called people, I left messages, I replayed every interaction as if a different hesitancy in my voice could unmake the night. I imagined Max's last seconds in every possible guise. The worst imagination is this, that he ran because being brave felt better than being afraid, that he thought movement was salvation and gave himself for it. I imagined Annie's last breath as anything but a simple closure. I wanted meaning to hang on their deaths, and cruelly learned that meaning does not always arrive. Time did not heal so much as erode. The first months were dense with legal questions and police, with flashbacks that were too sharp to bear and too frequent to dismiss. People asked me to talk to reporters. Friends who had not been there asked me to forgive them for not being able to understand. I tried to describe the whistle and could only summon metaphors. A drawn breath, a child's toy, the sound of the creek when the moon is full. Metaphors make for poor evidence. There were nights I would walk the perimeter of my apartment just to keep my feet busy. Sometimes I could hear a whistling in my chest, an echo that mocked the quiet. I would wake sweating, the firelight of that night burning behind my eyelids. Memory is not linear. It is a looping film. The same frames returned. Annie's hand falling from the marshmallow stick, Max's flash of fear, the tree that betrayed me. People told me what they believed. A counselor from a different camp offered an explanation that wrapped itself in folklore, a game that becomes a summoning if played wrong. An old woman at a diner said spirits of the camp are not to be trifled with, that some places hold grudges. A friend said it was just two kids in the wrong place at the wrong time, and grief had given them shape. Each theory came like a thin scarf to someone who was freezing. It promised warmth but left me shivering with the sense that I could be duped into comfort. I don't write to expiate my sin. I don't expect absolution. Survivors carry a weight that is private. Sometimes I say their names aloud. I say Annie's name into my hands and feel the emptiness. I say Max's name into my phone and then lower it because the words feel like breaking something. The local news had photographs of the camp from old summers, a carnival of children with bright swimsuits, a counselor with a whistle around his neck, a canoe gliding like a smile. They left those images on the web as if they could balance the dark with some light. People sent messages, some gentle, some invasive. "How can that be real?" wrote a man in a message that was meant to comfort. Grief tends to solicit explanations, and explanations are tidy things in a chaotic world. I have been asked if the whistle still comes to me, and if I still hear it. I do. It is quiet now, like a memory that will not be forgotten. Sometimes in the grocery store, in the sound of a distant train, a note will bend the way it did that night. I will pause and look toward the trees because my body remembers how to be small and vigilant. My hands still twitch with the urge to reach for wood when something calls. Old muscles learn their dances and refuse to unlearn them. There is a peculiar thing about warning. To warn is to hand someone possible terror and hope they avoid it. So I tell you, plainly and without flourish, so that the narrative carries its necessary bluntness. Never play the whistle game at night. Never let nostalgia convince you that the past is safe company. Some memories are doors that need remain closed. The camp will look like a relic, an easy haunt of summers past. But at certain hours and under certain moons, it opens like a mouth that knows how to take. You can tell yourself all sorts of rational things to make the world manageable. You can assume pranksters or illness, or structural collapse of the mind. You can tell yourself that the night was a cruel accident. But there's a deeper truth that lived in the pattern of the whistle that night. When something in the dark calls you back to the rituals of your youth, it might be asking for more than a laugh. It might be owed a price. After all that, people asked me what I would do if someone I loved wanted to go back. They asked if I would go back myself. The answer is no. Grief does not always teach prudence, but it teaches sufficient caution for the future. I will not step into a place where a sound can rearrange bodies. I will not tempt an as-yet unknown ledger with human lives. You might think that's a moral judgment. Maybe it is. Maybe it's simply self-preservation dressed as compassion. Either way, I have learned that some edges are not meant to be probed. Sometimes, in quieter moments, I picture Annie's laugh at odds and Max's ridiculous bravado, the way they could make the world feel smaller and kinder. I keep those images like small, fragile objects, because memory can still gift you things even when it takes others. I hold them at a distance, wrapped in a careful silence. If this terrified you, if the story made your skin crawl or left you with that particular ache of not knowing, then do one practical thing for me. Share it with someone who needs to hear a warning. Subscribe for more stories if you want the kinds of nights that teach us harshly about caution. But more than anything, take this as a plea I give you from the remains of that field. Do not answer a whistle in the dark. Do not think the past is an invitation. Some games are not for revisiting, and some nights keep their own rules. I keep the echo of that night with me. The whistle is a lesson I learned too late. Some rituals are doors, and once opened, you cannot coldly unopen them. I survived in one sense, but survival is its own small torment. I wake each morning counting breaths and memorizing the ordinary. There are days when the memory sits folded inside me, quiet like an unplayed tune. There are nights when it winds at the edge of memory like a moth at a window. Remember this: you should never play the whistle game at night. If the wind carries a sound that remembers childhood and dares you to step back into it, listen instead to the other kinds of voices, the ones that say, stay where you are, keep your hands at your sides, remember what you had. Nostalgia is a gentle predator. It will coax you into familiar shapes and then demand a debt. Say no to the call. Walk away. If that feels small, let it be small. Small choices keep lives intact. We buried them in the small hours without ceremony beyond the handfuls of earth friends could spare. The town spoke in hushed tones for a while, and then moved on to small tragedies of its own. People forget what doesn't touch them directly. That is normal. But it does not ease the hollow night that comes sometimes when I close my eyes. I see a tree and imagine hands where bark should be. I see the lake and worry at its surface for things that might be waiting. If I could have changed how the night fell, I would have. If I could have given my body to the thing so the others might have run, I would have. But those are fantasies that only serve to deepen the guilt. They are private and useless. The only real thing I can give now is this story, an admonition wrapped in confession. Hear it and keep it. Tonight, if you ever find yourself at the edge of a camp's field, and a sound like a child's breath whispers from the trees, turn away. Light your own small fire, eat your marshmallow, and put it out on your tongue and keep the world small and immediate. Hold the people you love without asking them to relive anything they have already survived. If you must play at all, play only in daylight and with the obvious and safe rules of people who know there is no cost. I've said it before and I will say it again because the thing that haunted that night respects only repetition. Never play the whistle game at night. Your curiosity is understandable. Your bravery is not owed to legends. Stay. Keep your feet on the path. Leave the past closed. If you do anything else, do it with the full understanding that the night keeps accounts, and sometimes it asks for more than you can afford. I am older now than when we lit that fire, older in a way that feels steady and fragile at once. I live with ghosts who do not leave me because I do not want them to be forgotten. They sit with me in ordinary places, taking up a space that is painful but honest. The warning I give is both an instruction and a memory. Learn from the cost we paid. Learn from my hands that reached and found only bark. Learn that sometimes the thing that calls you is not the thing you think it is. Don't go back to Camp Grinlow after dark. Don't let the whistle be more than a story told in daylight. If you ever hear it, walk the other way.